Hey guys, welcome back to the Base Brief. We have a loaded episode for you this week. As you know, there's a lot going on in the world. We're going to talk about Ukraine struggles and the Second Amendment there. We're going to talk about the feds reminding us to mask up if we get nuked. And lastly, we're going to analyze Biden's new Supreme Court nominee. So join us. All right, Brad, I am so happy I made it to this episode. It's been a rough morning.
Yeah, so how's the internet going? I know you had a little bit of issues.
Listen, it's been nothing but issues for me in my life. So you know, I'm a tech boomer. Our audience knows that I struggle with tech in general. And Comcast was messing up significantly over the past couple of weeks. And I just kind of got mad about it. And then I pitched a hissy fit and I canceled it. But I canceled it before I started new internet. And then I just thought I would use my phone as a hotspot. And then I was traveling and I got busy. And then my hotspot said I had overused all my limit and I can't use it as a hotspot anymore. So I had to hurry up and get AT&T, long story short, and finally got my router from them yesterday and tried to plug it in this morning. They told me all I would have to do was plug it in, it would be good to go, but lies. It's never as they say. And so fortunately, I don't know if the Base Brief people know, but if you watch OG Based, you know Pavel. He's our producer at FE, and he's absolutely incredible. And so fortunately, he and his girlfriend Zukaina live very close to me, and they let me come crash their office today. So I'm filming from their house, and very grateful for them, because otherwise, I don't know how I was going to film this episode.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. Otherwise, you would have had to, I don't know, call in, crash the public library.
Yeah, I would have been like at
no
Starbucks.
Idea. So for me, the thing on my mind a little bit is I made an appointment with the vet today for Reggie, and we're going to talk to the vet about putting him on some drugs, some anti-anxiety medication.
Reggie does need drugs.
I think he does. So for folks that don't remember, he's my 10-year-old beagle. I rescued him almost 2 years ago. He's got really bad PTSD, and for some reason the last month or two it just has been getting worse, and he's been quivering a lot, and he hides and his eyes twitch, and he's the cutest thing, and it's so sad. But maybe he needs to pop a few pills, I guess. So we're going to go talk to the vet. Because he's overall a happy dog, but he is clearly so anxious. He does this thing where he's asleep, and he's having nightmares, and he's fidgeting and going, ooh, ooh, like he's running in his sleep. And I'm like,
Oh, when I was in town even, he would come out to greet me, but then he'd go hide under the bed. He was so scared of everything around him. It's very sad. And since you and I both have anxiety disorders, we're big believers in getting help when you need it. And I think Reggie just needs a little help, and that's fine.
I've also just considered giving him some CBD.
It's so funny because Reggie kind of looks like a dog that would smoke weed. If he could. Yeah.
Something about beagles have stoner vibes. They're big floppy ears and... Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, really on a much more somber note, let's talk about what's going on in Ukraine right now. The Russian invasion continues. Unfortunately, soldiers are streaming in, bombings, all sorts of bloodshed and casualties are taking place. But we actually, I think most people thought that Ukraine would fold pretty quickly, but they're actually putting up quite a resistance to Russia and have shot down planes, killed Russian soldiers. And part of that is because the citizens of Ukraine are arming themselves. Take a listen to this news clip.
Now, back in Kyiv, many residents have taken shelter where they can. The government has handed out thousands of guns to ordinary citizens and is urging them to build petrol bombs to resist.
The northern outskirts of Kyiv, the front lines in the Russian assault on Ukraine's capital. Volunteers have taken up arms to defend the city. But without heavy defensive weapons, there's only so much they can do.
It's not enough in order to stop helicopters. It's not enough in order to stop tanks. I need something to stop this.
Outnumbered and outgunned, but refusing to quit.
So basically, the Ukrainian government has passed an emergency order giving people the right to bear arms. And then they've even started handing out tens of thousands of military-style rifles to civilians and even encouraging them to make bombs and stuff. So I guess it's heartening to see. These people are really brave. But for me, it kind of relates back to the Second Amendment here and why we have it.
Yeah, so I think there's, oh my gosh, there's so much going on. I've been working for the past couple of days really trying to educate myself on Eastern European politics because, as many people, I'm really not totally up to speed. And what we're seeing happen in Russia and Ukraine right now is a decades-long buildup. You know, the more I learn, the more I recognize it's not a one-off thing by any means. And so obviously the entire situation is very, very sad. We have friends who are both from Russia and from Ukraine. We have colleagues that are from both countries, and we know the real toll this is taking on lives both there and here, and war is always awful. But I will say that we are constantly being reminded during this that it's important that citizens have weapons. And one thing I hate in America is when you talk about the Second Amendment being to ensure that you can always protect your rights against government, there's so many people on the left that scoff at that. They're like, oh, you think you're going to go up against the U.S. military with all their might and their tanks? I'm like, the U.S. has lost the last couple wars that it entered, for the record, and it lost it against some people who were in the Middle East who had pretty much no infrastructure, who were hiding in mountains and had nowhere near the weaponry that we have. So yeah, I do think that we can rise up against government when needed. And I think the fact that the Second Amendment is so prevalent here in the U.S. and we have so many guns here, that I think while our government is largely corrupt and has a lot of issues, there is a barrier they don't cross, right? And I think we also kind of saw that even to an extent in Canada, where they were really punitive towards some of the protesters there. And you don't quite see it get to that level in the U.S. So I think that that's an interesting point. And I think that people have the right to defend themselves. And that's really an essential liberty, whether it be against government or armies or other people. You have the right to protect your person and your property. So I don't know if I want to call this a silver lining, because I think, again, it's just a very, very sad situation. But I will say it's elevating the importance of this right.
Yeah, I think it's a lesson. And that's because, unfortunately, right, people do say that you would never be able to withstand the U.S. military and everything. And even if we assume that's true, and you have a good point, guerrilla warfare from smaller, less organized parties has been successful against bigger militaries. But even if it is true that we ultimately could not resist the U.S. military or a Chinese invading military or whatever it may be, even if we say grant that's true, what we could certainly do is drastically raise the cost of suppressing and oppressing our people. They would have to go through and suffer mass casualties and mass resistance and town by town or whatever it may be. And I know all of this might sound very dramatic and very alarmist to people because we are the world power right now. We do have a strong military, and it's not going to happen now, but things are not guaranteed to stay the way they are. And it's certainly not beyond the realm of possibility that we could have the territorial U.S. be invaded at some point in our lifetimes, especially if conflicts like this keep heating up.
And one thing I want to point out is that because they're having to do this, right, because they're having to go in and fight this way, if that ever happens here, I talk about this in the most recent episode of Base, there is a real power in unearned suffering. Martin Luther King Jr. said there was a redemptive power in unearned suffering, because when people see people being attacked, people being viciously treated, it does awaken moral shame in them, and it's actually a very powerful I don't want to say marketing, but PR, right? Right now we see that a lot of people are really mobilizing in favor of Ukraine against Russia. And in part, that's because you see these images of people defending themselves and their leaders staying in the city. And it makes this really great narrative. Now, I'm not commenting because I'm still not comfortable quite weighing in exactly on who's who in this situation. But I will just say that it's very clear which way the tide is turning in the situation. Obviously, Russia is in the wrong for attacking. And they are the ones that are forging war right now. But I don't want to uplift the Ukrainian government either, because I just don't know enough about them right now. But the images we're seeing seem to be of people within the government who are really fighting for independence and for freedom and fighting back against authoritarianism. And so that's something that really galvanizes people. And we've seen that have major political implications over the weekend. You saw Germany start to get involved in this conflict, which just blew a lot of people's minds because they had been very committed to staying out of this kind of thing. You even saw Switzerland get involved. Switzerland is known for being the neutral
when you've lost
country.
Switzerland.
But I think some of that has to do with the fact that the images you're seeing are of unearned suffering. And so that is something that really motivates people. And those things do have an impact in politics and even in war. So it's a good point, Brad. I think you make an excellent point. If they had to do this, it would not work out well for them.
And I agree with you. Like, the Ukrainian government is problematic, and I also am by no means a foreign affairs expert. This is a long conflict that goes way back. But what we can safely say is the Ukrainian people do not deserve to have their homes invaded and be pushed out of where they live and all this violence, and they have every right to defend themselves. But what frustrates me about this situation is not what the people are doing, but that the Ukrainian government is only now giving them the right to bear arms, and only now allowing them to own these advanced weapons. Before all this, there were not relatively a very small amount of guns in Ukraine and a relatively restricted amount of gun ownership. And now, it's I guess it's better than nothing, but it's somewhat too little too late. Like, they're having to train people on the fly how to fire a weapon, right? Whereas in the US, you've got hundreds of millions of people that have been shooting guns since before they were born. It's like there's an aspect of too little too late here, and I can't help. There's no way to know for sure, but I can't help but wonder if they had like a robust gun and self-defense culture and rights and infrastructure and training like we do have in the US or even in Switzerland and some parts of Europe, would things be different? Would Putin have even considered invading, or would he have known, there'd be so many losses involved, or would their pushback be going even better? I can't know for sure, but it sure seems to me that it would be much better situated today.
Yeah, I think that that's a very likely outcome, that you would not have seen things go maybe to this extent. And I also think you bring up something else in mentioning this, which is that in the conflict right now, both sides have conscription. They are basically forcing people to fight. They're giving them guns. They're giving them arms. And this is something I think about a lot because I'm very, very anti-war. And I very much have this wish that people would just wake up and quit fighting for governments, because I really think throughout history, if you look at most of the conflicts, there's been so few times that people were actually fighting for their own interest in these conflicts versus for the elites and the oligarchs that rule them. And so when you think about that, I think that you would start to see a move away from conflicts that don't pertain to real defenses of liberty if people had those kinds of choices. And if people had access to weapons, they would have more of those kinds of choices. And so it's actually all very connected. And that's something that I found really interesting in watching Ukraine and Russia right now is just in recognizing these people are going to war to fight each other, and oftentimes they don't even know why. I've been watching TikTok a lot because, to be honest, it's as good of a news source as anything else right now. There's so many different conflicting narratives. There's a lot of propaganda out there. It's been really hard to know what's what, but watching TikTok, you can get firsthand accounts from people who are there and on the ground. And what I've seen is a lot of people saying the Russian soldiers that we're encountering, they don't know why they're here. They don't know why they're fighting. You have these governments conscripting people to come in and fight and die for them. And why do you hate each other, right? You shouldn't be enemies. It's all just kind of a made up conflict. And it's very, very sad.
Yeah, that's a good point too, because I've been talking a lot about how the governments are handing out weapons, and they are just handing them out to people, but they're also conscripting people, and that is wrong. You should never be conscripted to fight against your will. And that's something the Ukrainian government is doing, and that's absolutely wrong. But I want to talk about something else, and this is simultaneously even darker and kind of hilarious than what we were just talking about, which is that...
I love dark humor.
Right, I do too. And so I just hope that you're ready when the nukes come and are looming, and we get the emergency alert on our phone, and we go to huddle in the basement and await sweet oblivion. I hope you're ready to make sure you still mask up and social distance.
Oh my God.
So I covered this on Base Politics, and actually I don't think many other people did. So some other places like Reason have started citing that reporting and aggregating it. So that's very complimentary, to toot my own horn a little. But the federal government, so Putin just did something kind of scary, but probably symbolic. He just put additional nuclear forces on special combat readiness, which A, it's not really sure what that means, and B, I think it's just saber rattling. It's not indicative of any imminent action. I mean, he is... I've described Putin this way from talking to some foreign policy experts and friends. He is rational, but not reasonable. His goals and his aims are bad and not, acceptable or good things. He wants to conquer large parts of the world, restore Russian glory. He doesn't care about killing people. But he is a rational actor in that he logically makes decisions that advance his goals, as opposed to someone like Kim Jong-un in North Korea, who's just totally lost their mind. Well, Putin doesn't want to see... He wants to restore the Soviet empire, not have Russia nuked into pieces. So he is not going to launch a nuclear attack on the U.S. intentionally, even though he's saber-rattling right now and putting his systems on high alert and other things. But what cracked me up was that people were circulating materials online from ready.gov, which is a FEMA project here in the U.S., basically like a website giving people materials about how to prepare, like those cringy pamphlets, except this one is what to do if you get nuked. And it's just hilarious because the honest truth is you might not, what you do one way or another is probably not going to matter if you're in the red zone. In the yellow zone, yes, it will. So some of this advice is good advice, but it contains a bunch of stuff on this website in the nuke portion about making sure to mask and social distance while hiding from pending oblivion or radioactive fallout.
I'm sorry, it is hilarious though. Like, I mean, there's one tiny bit of this that's valid, which is that if you're in the fallout zone, you do want to stay inside and you do probably want to wear a mask because I think, from my understanding, you could theoretically survive it and it would dissipate over time if you were able to stay inside.
But the mask inclusion is for COVID.
But it's for COVID, right? That's what I was going to say. Like, it's not because of that. This is because they're worried about you catching COVID while you're trying to escape nuclear fallout. Like, the fact that my tax dollars went to create this pamphlet, the fact that this is what our government wants us to be concerned about if we get nuked. If we get nuked, by the way, because of their dumbass foreign policy that has probably been propping up Ukraine and creating a proxy state and antagonizing Russia for years. Like, as best I understand, that's kind of what's been happening. So, like, let's be really clear. You've had a terrible foreign policy for many, many years, and you constantly get us earned blowback and get us attacked. And the entire thing is so circular, and it's just such a great picture and a pamphlet of how terrible our government is, constantly creating these stupid threats we have to live with that disrupt our society, disrupt our economy, and then giving us the worst possible advice for doing so. Like, just the cherry on top is that they're never going to give us correct advice for how to actually navigate these things. What a mess.
No, and let's actually read some of this advice because it is hilarious. So here's one passage from the website. Get inside the nearest building to avoid radiation. Brick or concrete are best. Go to the basement or middle of the building. Stay away from the outer walls and roof. Okay, yeah, fair enough. That's decent advice. Now here's the funny part. Try to maintain a distance of at least 6 feet between yourself and people who are not a part of your household. If possible, wear a mask if you're sheltering with people who are not a part of your household. So that's how you know it's not about radiation or anything, because it says, otherwise it would just be wear a mask. But because it's only if you're from people from a different household, it's clearly a COVID thing. In fact, they even say this as much in another excerpt where they go, stay inside for 24 hours unless local authorities provide other instructions. Okay. Continue to practice social distancing by wearing a mask and keeping a distance of at least 6 feet between yourself and people who are not part of your household. I honestly, I thought this was the Babylon Bee, a parody website, right? Because it's like the perfect parody. But apparently, federal bureaucrats really think that Americans hiding from a nuclear explosion are going to be concerned with masking and social distancing. How out of touch can you possibly be?
Also, even the part where it says that they're not a part of your household, like you can't catch COVID from people who are part of your household, you absolutely can. In fact, didn't you do a piece on this at FEMA a while back that showed like a shockingly high number of people actually that got COVID got it from somebody in their household? Yeah, it spread at home. So like the fact that they still haven't even updated their COVID practices and this is what they're putting out. This is hilarious to me. I read one of the things you wrote in your article was something about they wanted you to call 911. You were like, who wants to explain to FEMA that 911 is probably not going to be able to answer if there's a nuclear bomb? Like, it's probably going to shut down.
Yeah, we have that quote too. It says, if you are experiencing a medical emergency, call 911 and let the operator know if you have or think you might have COVID-19. If you can, put on a mask before help arrives.
Stop.
There's so many things wrong with this that, like, think about it. If nukes are coming in, do you think calling 911, the line's going to be jammed? The people who work at 911 are going to be running home to their families. And also, what can 911 do to help?
Also, wouldn't a nuclear bomb knock out communications?
Well, this would be before it hits, they're saying, I guess. or afterwards.
Okay. I'm not good at tech, but I'm pretty sure you can't use the phone after a nuclear bomb.
Yeah, I guess it depends where you are in relation to the bomb.
But yeah, what is 911 going to do for you?
That's the real question. And if by, hey, I hope 911 could help. I don't see how, but say that they could and that they were available. You think I'm gonna freaking care about wearing a mask or if I have COVID? I mean, we just got nuked. Like, I just want to know. Find me the federal bureaucrat that wrote this, decided it was a good idea. Find me their boss or multiple people that read this over and approved it. Because, FEMA doesn't just post stuff like willy-nilly. I'm sure it goes through a whole process with like multiple layers of bureaucracy. And they all just said, oh, this is great. Let's publish this immediately for the citizens. Like, they must just be so deeply out of touch. I mean, the only person who I could possibly see following this advice is Dr. Fauci. But of course, like, he'll be in the special government bunker already for all the well-connected political people, so he won't even need to worry about any of it.
I just have other questions. Like, if there's a nuclear bomb, like, are you like, oh, wait, let me get my mask? Like, I have so many questions about who wrote this and who actually sat down and thought this is how people would respond. It makes no sense.
With your money.
And it actually makes me mad because I'm kind of fascinated by disaster relief and responses, and I've done some research into them. This is kind of nerdy, but there's this book called Hidden Brain that I think any central planner and all those people who don't want to be central planners should read. But it talks about like how people actually react in emergencies and in ways that we can actually have systems in place to circumvent some of that. Like if you ever see somebody, for one example, getting beaten up in public and nobody's rushing in to help them, there's actually research that shows if one person steps forward and intervenes, everybody else will. But if nobody does, it's like your brain kind of keeps you in lockstep and nobody intervenes. And so just even knowing that can make people more likely to intervene. So having those kinds of things in place when there's a disaster or something really bad happening are important. And instead, they're spending our money on this kind of thing. I have a former boss who lives in San Francisco, which is like honestly constantly under attack from fires, earthquakes. You just never know what's going to happen in San Francisco. And she's amazing. And she keeps an entire go pack basically ready to go with actual emergency items. She has this intricate plan with her friends and family for getting in communication and meetup points and like what to actually do if an emergency happens. And all I have to say is I want Mona to go run FEMA because this is not it. Like we need some new people in this entity. We need better imagination, better responses, because honestly, I mean, hopefully we don't get to a point of nuclear war. But again, given our idiotic foreign policy, you never know. And Americans do need better preparation if that does happen. This is a joke.
I mean, yeah, I agree that I don't think it's likely, but it's certainly not impossible, especially with the dangerous escalations that some people are proposing. I mean, there's a Republican senator who called on Biden to do a preemptive nuclear strike against Russia. Like, actually. Roger Wicker from, I think, Kansas or somewhere, but and I can put a link to his comments there. There are some people out here also calling for a no-fly zone in Ukraine from the U.S., which, to explain to folks what that means, it's not like the U.S. has a special force field we can set up that blocks planes. When we set up a no-fly zone somewhere, it means that we are going to shoot down any plane that enters it. If you shoot down Russian planes, I mean, we could quickly spiral into a war that could turn nuclear with nuclear power in Russia. Now, thankfully, and I got to give the Biden administration some credit for how they're handling this. They have very clearly said, no boots on the ground and no-fly zone, because they know that would potentially lead to war with Russia, which is catastrophic. I mean, no matter how you feel about the Ukrainian people, we can have all the compassion in the world for what they're going through, risking, the national security of not just the U.S., but like the fate of humanity from a nuclear conflict over their invasion is simply not on the table. But there are genuinely some crazy Warhawk people in this country in positions of power who, if they got their way, yeah, nuclear war could happen.
Yeah. And I mean, I honestly feel like the media is gunning for it. Like, I really do feel like the narrative that's being spun is like, one where you're meant to feel intense emotion about Ukraine and really trying to stir up the sentiment of like, we need to go in and do something. I see a lot, I've been tagged in this by people who are allegedly anti-war, allegedly libertarians in the past week, where it's like, Hannah, surely you see now that we must go in. I'm like, I absolutely do not see that. Like, under no circumstance do I think that there's an exception. We do not need to intervene in this. But it's easy. This is how people get sucked into the military-industrial complex, because when you see people suffering, when you see people being persecuted, the instinct is to do something, and I understand that. But if you know anything about history and our foreign conflicts, you know that us doing something does not usually result in any positive outcomes. It often makes things far more destabilized. It creates blowback, and at the end of the day, like, we have to be careful with our resources. We're not doing great as a country. We're not doing great with our infrastructure, with our budget, with our education. I mean, on virtually no plane is America like excelling right now. We need to keep our resources here. We need to invest in our own country. We need to protect American lives. And I think that it's very easy to emotionally manipulate people and get them to forget that, but we need to keep elevating that very basic fact. I hate what's happening over there, but I think that is up to Ukraine and their neighbors to figure out and handle, and it's not something we should ever be involved with.
Yeah, and I do think, for example, there are people literally calling for us to do regime change in Russia. And we have to make an important distinction, is that, like, opposing regime change is not the same thing as being pro-regime. At least I think you agree with me. I think Putin is terrible, right? I think he's done horrible things.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there is absolutely, one, we can't try to regime change a leader with access to nukes, and two, there's no guarantee that what would come next would be better. We've done all sorts of regime change where then we end up putting terrorists aligned with us in charge, or who are at first aligned with us and then aren't. Like, oftentimes we end up putting our own autocrats or our own, terrible dictators in charge, and then it doesn't end up any better for the people or even better for us sometimes. So the idea, there are people pushing for regime change. I'll put a link in the show notes to a little roundup of these crazies. And I just think that should be totally off the table, no matter how terrible Putin is. We could talk about things that we could do to respond, or diplomatic solutions, economic solutions maybe, but no, absolutely not to any of this military nonsense.
You bring up something that I think I want to make sure we cover here, and we've done a bit of this on Base Politics at the website, but it's been hard to talk about this because oftentimes when you are anti-war and you're anti-intervention, people will start to say like, oh, well, then you're aligned with the entity that they don't like, right? We saw that all the way back to the Iraq War when people said that about Ron Paul, like, oh, well, you're a terrorist sympathizer then. It's like, no, I just actually know how the world works and don't want to see these casualties. And so I think that you've seen some of that right now with people who are anti-war saying, well, then you're pro-Putin. It's like, absolutely not. I think that's such a played out sort of line of attack of trying to say that anybody who's not in favor of regime change or entering wars is a puppet. That's BS. But then it's also been difficult because there have actually been people who have been kind of pro-Putin on the far right.
I know there are a few people, few crazies who kind of are pro-Putin.
Yeah. I mean, not kind of, they've been chanting Putin at stuff. It's very creepy and weird. Those people are freaks. And as a whole, I think it's a small vocal minority, as it usually is with the fringy alt-right. But that being said, I think it's really hard to talk about some of this and be clear. So I want to over communicate in this episode that Brad and I hate Putin, think he's disgusting. I think he's a psychopath. And I think that you can think those things without wanting to intervene. And I think you can not want to intervene while not supporting what's happening. So it's a very fine line to toe, and I understand not many people do it. Certainly not many people do it well. Brad and I are really trying hard to make sure we're educated and that we are towing that line. But there's a lot of people who aren't, and it's very easy, I think, to go off the deep end and get sucked into some of these really problematic narratives when we discuss conflicts like this.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that. But to shift us on a little bit, because we don't want to talk about Putin all day, there's some huge news right now because President Biden, people have probably already heard this by now, but he just nominated Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson to be his Supreme Court nominee to fill Justice Breyer's, who is retiring, seat, a liberal justice for a liberal justice. It won't affect the balance of the court, but she's an interesting woman. She will be the first African-American Supreme Court justice, and Biden specifically said in his selection process he would only consider black women. And so here's what Biden and Kamala have had to say about the nominee they just unveiled.
It's my honor to introduce to the country a daughter of former public school teachers, a proven consensus builder, an accomplished lawyer, a distinguished jurist on one of the nation's most prestigious courts. My nominee for the United States Supreme Court is Judge Ketanji Jackson.
Because as we all know, elections matter. And when folks vote, they order what they want, and in this case, they got what they asked for. I went off script a little bit. And Judge Jackson, of course, will make a phenomenal justice. She is brilliant. She has a brilliant mind and a record of excellence.
Hannah, you want to tell us a little bit about Judge Jackson?
Yeah, so let me give people the basic facts about her. She has a degree from Harvard Law School, which is pretty typical for somebody who's elected or nominated to the Supreme Court. We usually see them come from Harvard, Yale, or another Ivy League. She clerked for Justice Breyer himself, who she would be replacing on the court if she's approved. And then she also clerked on the First Circuit before that and in the District of Massachusetts. So very high pedigree. She has experience in private practice as well and was also appointed to be the vice chair of the U.S. Sentencing Commission in 2010, which is something that I like. It goes, the U.S. Sentencing Commission has been doing a lot of work to really review a lot of the racial disparity in our sentences and working to ensure that we have a more equitable, fair way of handing out justice. Before that, Jackson was a public defender from 2007 to 2010. She was nominated to a federal district court by former President Barack Obama and confirmed in 2013 before Biden eventually selected her for the D.C. Circuit Court in 2021. So that's good news. That means she was recently approved for another position just about a year ago. So she probably will have a smoother path to being nominated and approved, but we'll see.
One other interesting thing too, Hannah, is she's actually related by marriage to Paul Ryan, the former Republican Speaker of the House. So I want to read what he had to say at one of her confirmation hearings. I appreciate the opportunity to share my favorable recommendation for Ketanji Brown Jackson. I know she is clearly qualified. Our politics may differ, but my praise for Ketanji's intellect, for her character, for her integrity, it is unequivocal. She is an amazing person, and I favorably recommend your consideration. I was kind of impressed and moved by that.
So I actually thought that was really cool as well. I saw that they were related. I did just misspeak. I said hot. He's not hot. I have to take that back. He has a pretty face, but Paul Ryan is mixed bag for me. But as a whole, very conservative Republican lawmaker, former Speaker of the House, former vice presidential candidate on the GOP ticket. So that's pretty high praise. I also saw that she's had some praise from a few other conservatives who've worked around the law and in the administrations of Trump. So I think that this is something that could be a good indication for her. She had 3 Republicans who voted in favor of her for her last nomination. They were kind of the usual suspects, people who will cross the line on things like this. It was Lindsey Graham, Susan Collins, and who's the other lady? That's always
is it Lisa Murkowski from Alaska?
Yeah, Lisa Murkowski. So we'll see what happens, but I have a good feeling that she will be approved. I don't think we're going to see a huge contention around this. There doesn't seem to be much to throw at her, right? I've done some digging. The thing that the right is going to hate about her is that she ruled against the Trump administration a few times over the past year when it comes to some of the disclosures and things that people were seeking to investigate him. But it really wasn't like politicized votes that she took. She kind of was just ruling on like general administrative, like, does the court have the authority to give this kind of thing? And that's been a lot of what she's done. So while they're going to make that contentious and politicized, I didn't really even get the feeling that it actually was that contentious of a ruling. It just kind of seemed like these are the facts and this is what you have the right to do. But aside from that, I really found no red flags in her background. So it seems like he made a pretty solid pick.
I think he did too. My prediction, I think every Democrat will vote for her, so she'll be confirmed even if it's 50-50. And I think she'll end up being confirmed like 51 or 52 to 48-49. She'll get a few Republicans voting for her as a sign of good faith. Because honestly, she's really well qualified, and she seems like an excellent person and an excellent selection. There's not much to say about her negatively, which is why I honestly think that Joe Biden did such a disservice to Ketanji Brown Jackson when he did this identity politics thing about only pick a black woman, because she's hella qualified on her own merits. He could have just picked her and she'd be the first African-American woman on the Supreme Court without all of that, right? Considered everybody and then still picked her. And that way, you know, he's unfortunately, through no fault of her own, put a little bit of an asterisk on her, or made her out to be like an affirmative action pick in many people's mind. And that was so unnecessary, that identity politics. It made her nomination so much more divisive than it had to be. I kind of connect it to like Barack Obama, right? The fact that we elected a black president is a big deal. And that was viewed as a sign of like historical progress in many ways. But imagine if the Democrats had said, we're only going to consider a black presidential nominee. It wouldn't have had the same effect, because it would have been seen as so divisive and so toxic identity politics and everything. And so I actually think Biden did that to pander to like the woke left, but he didn't need to do it. And it actually did her a disservice, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that he brought criticism about that wouldn't be there otherwise, right? And now you're always going to have this following her around of people saying, oh, she only got this because of this. And I think that's really, I mean, he was obviously pandering. He was pretty desperate in the election to rally black votes because otherwise he was about to lose. Let's recall that he was not doing hot in the primaries. He got to South Carolina. He needed the black vote and he started stumping on this. And like, I get it. I get what he was doing. It was politics, but I think it was unnecessary. And I do think it's disrespectful. If somebody ever told me that I have, actually people have said this to me on numerous occasions, like not so much like you have this job because you're a woman, but more like, oh, you have this job because you're pretty. Or I had one person write on my Facebook one time and they're like, obviously her dad got her job. And I'm like, my dad's a pastor. Like, but like that assumption, but like that assumption that you didn't earn what you have, that you didn't build your own career. I've had people also say like, who writes your scripts for you? I'm like, I write my own script, sweetie. You think I'm just a little puppet? Like that kind of thing. It's so demeaning. And that's what this reminds me of people saying like, oh, you're only going to get this because you're this race and this gender. Like that's not, that would just, I don't know. To me, that would really take away my achievements. And when you look at her background, what she has achieved, it's very impressive. I mean, she has such a lengthy background and has done so many cool things. And she's on very prestigious boards and raises a lot of money, it seems, for organizations. And it's just, you look at all that she's accomplished in her career and you're like, girl, like, where'd you find the time? She has 2 kids.
It's also so cool that she's going to be the first public defender on the court now, right? I know that you have strong thoughts about this, so tell us what that means.
Oh my God, guys. I actually get chills about this. Like I'm trying not to let myself get too excited because it's happened to me before, but like you have to understand, this is something I've cared about for a long time because I am weird and I love looking at Supreme Court decisions and I love kind of analyzing how outcomes are achieved. And the thing is, we have not had a person on the Supreme Court of the United States with a background in practicing as a defense attorney, a public defender especially, since Thurgood Marshall, who was nominated, I believe, in sometime late 1960s. He died in 1993. And really, like, not only that, but we've had so few people on the Supreme Court that have even ever practiced against the government. Like Ruth Bader Ginsburg had not been a public defender, but she had done some civil litigation against the government, which was better than most. But almost exclusively, judges have been former prosecutors, which are people who have built their careers upholding the government and upholding its edicts. And they're not people who have stood with individuals and with the minorities and against oppressive government and against corruption. And I just think I've worked so extensively on criminal justice reform, the mentality and how people view the world when you compare a prosecutor to a defense attorney is one of the most stark things you'll ever encounter. I mean, just radically different perspectives. And I know there's some good prosecutors out there. I couldn't name you one, but I'm sure there are somewhere in the country, people who are in this profession and like not being abusive and not overstepping the Constitution, but so many of them do. And they have this like mentality that they're just sort of above the law and it's okay if they do it. And I think a lot of them carry that over to the bench when they get there. And if you look at the erosion of civil liberties that we've seen in this country over the past couple of decades, I think it's very evident. It's not just the Supreme Court. It's actually all courts are more likely to have prosecutors as judges, but Supreme Court is definitely the highest court in the land, so it matters a bit more there. But we've seen a real erosion of things like privacy. right? Having to get a warrant through proper protocols, having to actually give people due process, having to actually give people a trial. We barely have jury trials in this country anymore. It's all but evaporated. 99% of cases at the federal level are pled out. 95% at the state level are pled out. People don't get their basic civil liberties anymore, especially when it comes to issues under the criminal justice system. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that we have had nobody there representing that side. And so I am just thrilled that she has spent time working to overturn the government versus uphold it, and I have reason to hope that that will have an impact on the decisions she makes while she's on the court.
Yeah, and so she has that experience, which is super valuable, but in her legal career to date, has she also ruled in favor of civil liberties and criminal procedure and stuff?
Yeah, it's kind of, I don't know that I can speak to that as in depth, because it seems like a lot of the positions she was in were not courts that would determine those kinds of questions. She's done a lot more administrative type law, and that's just by nature of her appointments. It's not that she gets to pick those things. She's just been on circuit courts that tend to deal more with that kind of legal question.
DC Circuit deals with a lot of federal administrative stuff.
Yeah, so it's kind of hard to say, but I mean, the fact that she was nominated to the Sentencing Commission, I think, would speak well to her views on civil liberties, and obviously having Obama nominate her to that, I think, is an indication that she was somebody who cares deeply about those issues. The Sentencing Commission does some pretty good work. While it is governmental, I don't hate them. They put out some good research that I've relied upon. And as a whole, I mean, I don't know that they've been super effective in actually achieving change, but the research that we've gotten from them has actually mattered, and we've been able to use that effectively to push public policy change. So I'm cautiously optimistic. Again, I haven't been able to find out enough about her to like really know exactly where she's going to stand on certain issues. I'm of course, she's probably going to be to the left of me, and that's okay. But I do still think, above all, just having people there who know what it's like to fight the government, who know how corrupt the government can be, and who have the instinct to care about people who are being persecuted by and who come out on the wrong side of it. I just think that speaks volumes. So I'm excited to see what happens, and yeah, I think there's just not a lot to criticize so far. So I'd like to see what she does.
I think that's absolutely great. And I'll be clear, like, we're focusing on this because it's unique, but she's not going to be a friend to us on economic liberties or the Second Amendment or a lot of these things. She's a liberal justice. So let's be clear with people. We're talking about her as a civil libertarian potentially, because that would be unique on the court and very valuable. But overall, I mean, she's not a libertarian judge.
She's no Gorsuch.
No, there's only one daddy on the Supreme Court for right now, and that's Daddy Gorsuch,
the
silver
so
fox and constitutional defender. But I do want to ask you, what if you were in the Senate, right? Would you vote yes or no on Ketanji Brown Jackson? Because I struggle with this in my head. It's really like, is it, as a senator who is based and believes in free markets and constitutional liberty and everything we believe in, is it your job to vote for a nominee who is well qualified, has integrity, and is a good candidate for the job? Or is it your job to only vote for people who will uphold the law as you believe it should be upheld? It's a hard one for me. I'd be tempted to say I want to vote for her to show, like, bipartisanship, she's qualified, she's legitimate, she seems like a good person, but at the same time, she doesn't believe in she believes in like a form of living constitutionalism that is the liberal judicial philosophy, and I really don't believe in that. I believe in enforcing the rule of law as it is written, right? A more originalist or textualist philosophy. So I don't know what I would do, and I struggle with it. So how would you wrangle with that if you were a senator?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. It didn't used to be this contentious. It used to be that you'd see large numbers of bipartisan votes for nominees, because the reality is that the courts are not supposed to be partisan. And I think it's unfortunate that we've created this system that increasingly does see like an activist kind of court, and increasingly does try to use the courts as like another war where they want to fight between Democrats and Republicans. That's not really how things should be. And if you talk to most justices, they actually would still push back on this. Now, of course, you are informed by your ideology, but most justices do not go and read the law based on like what would the Democratic Party say or what would the Republican Party say. And that's why you actually will see in Supreme Court decisions, there's actually a lot more agreement than you recognize. Like oftentimes they're in lockstep. It's really the big cases that you see these like more divisive splits between them. And so I think that's one thing I just want people to understand is that's the way we read the law should not be based on partisanship. It should be based on constitutionality. Now, when you get into legal doctrine of how you would interpret the law, this is kind of more where I think I would question somebody, because there are people who believe predominantly in something called stare decisis, which is basically a Latin term that means instead of going back to the original Constitution and saying, what does this say and how does it apply to the law, you instead go back and look at former legal precedent and what other judges have decided on similar cases in the past, and then you rule based on that. And I hate that we do that in the U.S. It's gotten us a really crappy system, and I don't like that people are heavily reliant on that, and I think that actually is the vast majority of judges. The other two ways of reading the law would be judicial activism, right? People who they don't really care what the law says. They're going to find a way to like get the opinion they want because they have a certain outcome they're gunning for.
Well, they would call it living constitutionalism.
They would call it living constitutionalism. And then you have the third, which is kind of where Gorsuch is, which is more of an originalist, where they actually do go back and look at the original doctrine. Scalia was infamously a major originalist and had a lot of great decisions because of it. So I think I would be more inclined to find out how they read the law based on those standards. And if somebody was committed to originalism, I'd feel comfortable voting for them. If they were in the other two camps, I probably wouldn't feel as comfortable voting for them, and I think I'd have to go off that. However, I do wish that we got back to a system where it wasn't so divisive over judges, and it really was less of a partisan thing. I think that might be a pipe dream at this point. It doesn't feel like we're moving in that direction. But it is frustrating because, like, for example, when Gorsuch was nominated versus when Kavanaugh was nominated, you and I were thrilled about Gorsuch for good reason. He is just, oh my God, slam dunk. Hot, brilliant, amazing. I love him. But when Kavanaugh got nominated, right, people were up in arms, and you saw the right like radically defend him, and the left was, I think, unjustly attacking him. But I hated how Kavanaugh read the law. I went back, and he did have a lot of problematic decisions, especially around things like privacy protections.
He was a big government Bush Republican.
Yes, like he was awful. I would never have voted for Kavanaugh, and he was a Republican nominee.
His vote became about Me Too and due process, in which case I defended Kavanaugh. But if it had actually been more about his actual ideology, he would have been much less likely to be confirmed, I think. The left did the right a favor on that.
They actually did, because he's kind of a trash judge, honestly. Like, not great. I don't have that much good to say about him. Again, I think he was maligned when it comes to the sexual assault charade they put on. But, like, when it comes to his actual way of reading the law, I would never have voted for him. So I would not see things in a partisan way if I had to vote. But also, I would not be a Republican or Democrat senator because I hate both parties. So I would just be a real outlier as far as how I think about things.
I think when I've thought about running for office, I always imagine myself I honestly always imagine myself running as a Republican, winning for like a 6-year Senate term or something, deciding not to run for re-election, and either declaring myself independent and maybe caucusing with Republicans, doing a reverse Bernie, or declaring myself LP like Amash did. I just think, practically speaking, you can get elected as a Liberty Republican to national office. You can't yet really get elected to Congress or the Senate running on a Libertarian Party ticket. Then again, someone has to be first.
Somebody's got to be first, but in order to get there, there's just a lot of real laws that we'd have to overturn to make it a fair playing field for people. So, but yeah, I don't know. I think that even if you were to be independent, it's hard being independent because you don't have a base, you don't have a voting block, and so really being able to get anything done, which is why Bernie's an interesting case study. This is a tangent, but it came up, so I'm gonna go there. But like, Bernie was an independent for so long, and he was kind of just like out in the desert, right? He was out in the wild, like crazy old Bernie, and then after decades of being in office, blew up and now has all this influence. And it actually is kind of encouraging to me in a way, because it makes me think perhaps there's other routes for our kind of people to do that. And maybe you don't get the easy, quick win, but if you're there preaching the right thing for long enough, kind of like Ron Paul, like maybe eventually it blows up and you get people's attention. And having that bully pulpit can be as important, if not more, than what you're actually voting on.
Yeah, that's a really good point. But I think we should wrap it up there on the SCOTUS talk and go over to our hot takes. And I will kick us off because I have a hot take. And let me start with the serious note, which is I am very open to the criticisms of the idea of broad-based economic sanctions against Russia, because that ultimately hurts the Russian people, who are not responsible for what their government is doing or for this invasion. There have actually been a lot of anti-war protests in Russia right now, even though they risk being imprisoned or killed or poisoned or whatever. So I totally get that. However, I do think it is the right decision on the soccer front and sports front that FIFA has decided to kick Russia out of the World Cup and the other international competitions, because you were going to have a scenario where other teams were going to be expected to play in Russia on the current schedule. Nope. And also, Ukraine theoretically could have had to play Russia, right? And a bunch of other countries that are worried about, are we going to be next? Your Finlands of the world specifically came out and said, we will not go to the World Cup if Russia is allowed. So some like libertarian soccer fans, which is a very small niche, but I'm plugged into it on Twitter, were criticizing this, saying it's not fair to the players. The people of Russia don't support the invasion. Why are you punishing them? Yeah, I'm sorry, but I think it's the right call. I think it's the only practical thing to do. And also, it's the kind of thing that egomaniacs like Putin might actually bother them. It might actually get to them.
Well, and I am so against intervention, but I love seeing the market rise up. And like we've seen that with Airbnb offering their units to house people. We've seen this with Elon Musk stepping up and expanding his Starlink software, I guess, over there. So I think
they're satellites, Boomer. They're satellites that provide internet to Ukraine.
I just know Elon Musk is hot.
I mean, to be fair, I didn't know what Starlink was until I saw that news and looked it up either, so.
Still don't quite understand, but we're going to keep it moving. All right. My hot take is that people should send me more free stuff, because I don't go into the office very often, but I went in after about a month and a half yesterday, and I had so many presents. I had swag. First and foremost, Pacific Legal Foundation, which is a great foundation, does really cool pro bono economic litigation. They sent me these really nice bourbon glasses that say I respectfully dissent, which I just thought was so cool. And then also this jewelry company, I met this woman on Instagram. She goes by Gratefully Helen, if somebody wants to look into her. And she has this beautiful jewelry, but she's a free marketer. And all of her jewelry comes with a Milton Friedman quote. And so she messaged me and she was like, would you like to see some of my jewelry? And I'm like, yes, I would. So she sent me jewelry. I'm wearing some up today. You can see my earrings, my necklace, my rings. I'm blinged out. And I just love this experience so much that I would like to encourage other people to send me gifts to my office, because I will promote it on the show without being asked, but also like just makes my day. So that's my hot take.
Awesome.
You look jealous that you haven't gotten any free swag.
Yeah, sometimes people send me books. That's literally like people will send me their book and ask me to review it or cover it or whatever, but I've never gotten any. And I've gotten like very nice like letters or emails from people, but I've never gotten any swag.
I was trying to dissect your face. I thought you were annoyed, and then I was like, oh no, he's jealous.
Yeah, jealous is the correct face. All right, we have some...
Send Brad gifts too.
Yeah, send me some gifts. Iced coffee, coffee grounds, come through. But so we have some social media feedback from our listeners. We also, if you're listening, we have a new email address set up. It's podcast@based-politics.com. Send us your questions and comments every episode when you listen. We got thousands of you, up 10 of thousands on some episodes listening now. We want to engage with you. So send us your questions and comments, podcast@based-politics.com. I will put that in the show notes. And we will read some comments and questions on every episode. But for today, we're going to read some social media feedback. And I'm going to start with a really funny one that I liked. Someone named Mary Kate wrote, okay, because you did a big post of a picture of the two of us, encouraging people, again, to check out Base Politics, and it got a ton of views. And so Mary Kate wrote, okay, I guess now I have to get to know Brad. I haven't wanted to get too attached to the men in your life, but this looks like one relationship that has staying power. Great duo.
I cracked up. So I love Mary Kate. She's a great activist in Tennessee. And she's just so sweet. And it's funny because I met her through an ex-boyfriend of mine, but we have stayed friends. And and she's ooh, somebody might be picking the side. She is awesome. But I was laughing because I recently, like in recent years, I stopped posting like about my actual dating life because people got a little involved. And then when I would break up with somebody, they'd get kind of sad. They'd be like, what happened to this person? And I'd have to explain. So I understand the sentiment, but it's fine for people to get attached to you because you're not going anywhere. So she's spot on. All right. We also had, so by the way, so I was putting out new promo photos of us is what I published. So if you haven't seen our new promo photos, go check them out. We really like them. And make sure
we're going to do new logos and podcast art. We're
Yes,
just working
we
on
are.
finding someone to contract for that.
It's coming. We're just actually underwater. Both Brad and I do nothing but work and we're exhausted,
Yep.
but we're getting to it. Okay. It's coming. Also, I realized we need to say this more on the show. The website is based-politics.com. Somebody told me the other day, like, I love your show. I was trying to find your website. You don't ever mention it. Based-politics.com. Bookmark it, write it down. But
I'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, put it in the show notes. But we were promoting some of our new photos, and someone named Steven wrote, if you two become the main driving voices behind the American Liberty Movement, we are in good hands and will do just fine. Y'all give libertarians a good name and are helping to educate the cause and break the stranglehold the GOP has on the American right. Which was just very, very kind and encouraging. And I just want to say, this kind of thing really does mean a lot to me because we do both get a lot of hate. And oftentimes people,
Just a smidge.
don't... Just a smidge, but oftentimes people who hate you are so much louder. And then I'm reminded, like, a lot of people like the work that we're doing and benefit from it. They just aren't always as vocal about it. And so getting these kind of comments really goes a long way for our morale. So thanks, Stephen.
Yeah, and now, of course, that's the one you gravitated to. I like this one from Franco. Hottest duo in politics. Another one from Casey. Those jawlines can defeat anything. Another guy, I didn't put it in the doc, but he just wrote, "You're hot."
Brad's like, tell me I'm pretty more.
Well, I think he was talking to you, but
I don't know.
I guess with our audience, you don't know.
Somebody was trying to have your babies on one of my comments the other day. Did you
Yes.
see that? They were like, I want to have Brad's babies. And I was like, oh my God.
And I replied and said, "That's not going to happen, but you should listen to our podcast," with a link. And he replied, said, "I guess that'll have to do."
This one made me laugh really hard too. Somebody wrote and said, the best libertarian couple, not actual couple, that deserves more credit than what they're given. Which
I
is
like
true.
that.
Like, there's some really great libertarian power couples. Matt and Terry Kibbe, obviously. Stephanie and Austin Peterson. Who else might? Rand and Kelly Paul. There's some hotshot couples out there, but I do think that we deserve to be in that list. Because while we are not actually a couple, we are a duo. And yeah, we're going to fight for our space in that crowd.
Well, and I thought it was funny, this is our last comment here, but you said something on the post like, become our besties, listen to our podcast or something. And Spike Cohen commented, star basties. Like, that's what we should call this squad. And I think that's the people who love base politics, who love this podcast, you're the basties now. It's like the Swifties.
Yeah, basties. I thought it was great. I don't know why Spike is so exceptionally talented at coming up with things like this. Do you remember when a year or so ago, I had launched my website and he started calling my followers cocksketeers?
No, I did not.
I was like, why are you so good
just
at
called
coming
him
up with
Simps.
these names? We love Spike. He's great. So you're officially basties now, and we love you guys. Send us an email. We want to engage with you more. We want to hear your thoughts. We want to read your stuff on the air. So hit us up, and otherwise, we'll see you next week. And until then, stay based.